Welcome to RPG Reanimators, a podcast for GMs where we dissect horror scenarios and offer our experiences and advice to reanimate them at the table. I'm Lex.
I'm Nathan.
I'm Alex.
I'm Holly.
Today, we're examining a game system, Aberration, called Ten Candles. We'll discuss the system itself, what makes it special, and give our best advice on how to try running it at your table. Now, let's examine this aberration. So, Alex, can you tell us what this system really is?
Yes, so mechanically, it is a dice pool type system with added on mechanics in the form of candles being the game timer, as well as a narrative like checkpoint list. It was written by Stephen Dewey of Cavalry Games, and he also is known for writing other tabletop RPG systems. He published a book called To Serve Her Wintry Hunger, in which players get to cut out paper snowflakes as a game mechanic. I had the pleasure of meeting him at PAX East.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah,
So, is there a particular premise or a setting to play this system?
right. So the sun has gone out, the world is dark. They, the entities, have shown up and are now starting to basically hunt everyone else down. Pretty grim.
Yeah, tragic horror is definitely the name of the game here.
And it tends to be really like personal level, right? Street level characters. We're not expecting superheroes, adventurers, that kind of thing primarily, right?
Right. It uses the current world as a setting, and it lays on some apocalypse themes.
Yeah, reading through the setting descriptions in the book, it felt like something that would make Cormac McCarthy blush. That the skies have all grayed out, crops have died, satellites have gone dark, all the power grids and things have faded. Basically, it's you're playing in the road with a little bit of oh, what was the movie with the sound? Um,
A Quiet Place?
A Quiet Place. I don't know. At least that was the gist I was getting when reading through it.
Yeah, I believe the byline is 10 days ago the sun went out. 5 days ago they came. And so that's your basic like 1-2 premise.
Which is kind of interesting that it doesn't start immediately as the action is happening. Usually we tell people kind of, drop right in during an action in media res, but this has given it a little bit of time for characters to be familiar. And so maybe when these creatures show up, they're not as surprised. That's an interesting choice.
And so, is there any specific location or time frame or setting? You know, we tend to talk about Call of Cthulhu tends to take place around the 1920s to 30s, and then something in modern era. Is there anything like that in Ten Candles?
Yeah, so the default setting that the game introduces with its session modules is default. This is modern day and the world's ended. But I've also in the session modules are settings where it's in space on a space station, or you're just playing as dogs.
Yeah.
So it can get
Oh,
pretty
that makes
flexible.
me sad. That makes my heart tremble a little
Yeah.
bit. Can't do
Yeah,
that.
that one's a
Yeah.
sad one.
But yeah, I saw another one of the prompts in the book that was in the 1700s. It really sounds like
Mhm.
it's the world can end at any time that you want, based on what you think sounds like a compelling startup for it.
Absolutely.
And some of them don't even require the end of the world, just a drastic shift. I think they have one of them that's people fleeing Miramar. And it's not like at the end of that the world ends, but your characters will not survive. So you're still playing out the rough story beats.
Right, the end of their world, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me how it's played? We've talked a lot about the tone of it, but what is it going to look like at the table?
So it's a D6 system where the number of dice are equal to the number of candles that are lit. So you have a dwindling pool of dice that are available to the players. The candles are put out one by one as players fail rolls. So a successful roll is a 6 on any one of the dice. If you don't achieve that, you have failed a roll, you darken a candle. Also, a hard mechanic to the game is as you're rolling, even if you are successful, any ones that you roll are moved out of the dice pool temporarily, and everyone subsequently in that round will roll with fewer and fewer dice until a candle's put out. And then you go back to the dice pool as the number of candles being lit.
And then, if I understand correctly, the GM gets a dice for every candle that is unlit, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you have that push-pull of who has narrative control in this moment. So when a player rolls, the GM will roll whatever dice they have, and whoever has more successes gets the narrative control. Even if players succeed, if the GM succeeds more, they have successfully completed their action, but the GM narrates what actually happens.
So usually I understand that when you put out a candle that kind of calls an immediate end to the scene and you establish some truths. Can we kind of talk about the structure of how established truths work?
Oh, please do.
So the establishing truths gives the players some agency. The first established truth is the world is dark. And you go around the table and everyone says one truth. And it can be any truth that the players decide in the moment. Whenever I've played with folks who are still kind of learning it, it can be something as simple as, how your character is feeling. But it could be introducing a wrench to what's going on. Like, oh, you hear a rustling in the next room. A hard rain starts to pour. Something that, sets up the next scene to be a little bit more interesting. And these truths are irrefutable. Once they have been said by the player, it is the truth. The only thing you cannot speak to truth is a truth about them. Something that defines who they are.
And there's one truth that everyone has to say for the last candle, which is, and we are alive.
Yeah, so it almost becomes like a chant.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing it from a different room, you just hear people all together just say, and we are alive.
Yes. It's really immersive as
Mhm.
each candle goes out one by one in the dark room that you're playing.
And if I understand correctly, it's this chant of these things are true, the world is dark, and we are alive gets repeated until the last candle goes out. And you end with these things are true, the world is dark.
And that is it.
Super cheery.
It's dark. A tragic horror really is a fitting descriptor. Something else that is important is before the game really begins, once you've created your character, but before play starts, your players record their final message to the world, their goodbye message. And then at the very end, when all the candles are out, you play all of those messages back for them to listen to as everyone sits in silence.
Actually, backing up a little bit, could you talk more about how the character creation really happens, including the voice memos, of course?
So character creation is really just 4 index cards where a character is composed of their vice, their virtue, their brink, which is when they're what they've been pushed to do in this apocalypse, and their hope, which is a moment where they will find hope if X is accomplished as the game master permits and tries to tie it with the story. And the really fun part about character creation is the fact that I believe you don't get your own virtues or vices. You get so you write down the vice and you give it to the person to your left, and you write down your virtue and you give it to the person to the right. So that's when you have to really improvise and figure out what you have to work with. The brink is also a very cool mechanic where it's a secret that another player will write about you. Like, I've seen you cannibalize his family to live, and then I'll give it to the player to my left, so you would know what they've done. There's an additional part. The person who sits next to the GM writes the brink for them, so that way whoever they are, this entity, they can change pretty much every single playthrough. So you can say that I have seen them mimic people's voices, or I've seen them fly. And that's just fuel that the GM can work with. And one of the people who sits next to the GM also gives a brink to another player. They have seen you, and you can throw in a monkey wrench, like they have seen you worship them.
So you're really seeding drama from the start with these kind of brinks, and the vice and virtues are kind of how you define your character.
Hmm.
The brink is supposed to represent what your character is capable of in their worst moment. Like what when you are broken down to your base instincts, what are you truly capable of?
Yeah.
And so that's why they don't let you use your brink until you've burned your other cards.
Until you've burned your other cards. So why would
Yes.
someone burn their cards in this?
You'd burn your cards to get rerolls. Generally, you don't want to fail because failing will give over narrative control, or you may have cases where you've rolled a lot of ones, and ones get removed from the remainder of the scene, so you can't keep rolling them. It diminishes your chances, basically. So you might want to burn a card,
But you would get to re-roll all of the dice for that. No?
just the ones. So it's a way to mitigate some of your disaster, basically.
Interesting.
Keep the fire burning for a little longer.
Right. And there are some different variations with like rinks and moments of how those work with the dice. They're subtle shades kind of re-roll the dice so that you have more in the pool or more successes available to you. And it is kind of interesting that the idea is you have a vice and you actually physically burn it, and that is no longer a part of your character. It's a really interesting physical reminder that you don't have to role play that anymore, or you should perhaps role play the lack of that vice or virtue as you go. So maybe previously you had your virtue was a caring father, and you burn that away, and now you have an opportunity to show how that is no longer true.
You know, from a role playing and improvisational standpoint, that's really interesting that you're starting off with sort of the most equipment to tell you who your character is in the beginning. And then as you potentially sacrifice these parts of yourself, there's less telling each player like what this character is and truly letting the player more embody that like you have been this person, you now control much more of like, do they have a new vice? Is that something else? Like, are they losing these parts of themselves? How are they acting? So it frees you up the longer that it goes.
Right. And it doesn't have to be losing a part of yourself. It's also how that helps, that vice or virtue
Hmm.
helps you in this situation.
Interesting.
Yeah. Do you have more you want to talk about that, Lex?
I am still. I'm sorry. So just help me through it. I'm trying to understand the whole dice pool bit. So, say in the beginning, there are 10 dice. You're going through a narrative scene. People can roll the whole handful of 10. You count your sixes as successes, and then the ones as, you should really just play this with the alien dice, honestly. But anyway, so you take the ones and then you pull them out for just the rest of that scene.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. Things happen, then that candle goes out. Do the ones go back into the pool?
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Okay, but then you would
So,
take
but
those
then
out.
you only have 9 if you start from 10.
Yeah.
Right. But the GM would then get one
one.
panic dice, basically.
Yeah, the one for the unlit candle. Yeah.
Gotcha. I mean, I'm just saying that's GM getting stress dice. It makes sense to me. Anyway, I digress. Can you tell me more about the voice memos? So I just kind of wanted to clarify the game mechanics before getting into that, but
Yeah.
it sounds really
So
unique.
once the characters are created using these 4 index cards, you basically have an idea of who they are as a whole. So you give them a name, you give them a background, and then you pass around a voice recording device or your phone, and each player basically takes turns saying their final message to the world. And Once that's complete, the game master takes that, tucks it away for later, and later is when all the candles go out and everyone's dead. And it's really harrowing when all the candles go out, you do your last ritual with the truth being the world is dark, and then the GM just hits that voice memo, hits play, and the final messages are played. It's honestly surreal.
It's really tragic. Yeah.
People get like, it's not uncommon for people to get a little teary-eyed, at the end. And it's interesting how prophetic some of the final messages end up being in the end. It's just a very interesting way to see it play out.
Yeah, I'd love to steal that for other games, especially ones that you could actually record like video. You could do something for public access with it. Just really any long campaign would be a lot of fun to see where did your character start? What were they hoping for? And by the end, we play a lot of horror games to see how far they've fallen.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me, I'm sure I've seen movies like that where, the found footage go through all the horrible things, then the end credits, it's like, hey guys, we're going to go to this place
Mhm.
to show that contrast from where they started. So we've talked a lot about player improvisation. Can you tell me what it would be like to GM this game in terms of narrating and improvising and like how the scene structure would really play out?
The GM really has a lot of the improv roles here. One of the things that I think we should talk about towards the GM are the moments that a player defines. Moments are an interesting part of character creation where each person defines a moment like I find an old toy on the ground or I hug my family again. Maybe they're separated at the start. Something that, if they accomplish it, would fill their character with hope for survival. They won't, but that's not important. You're playing the game like you're going to survive. And when you do this, you get a hope die, which is a helpful thing when you have to roll. It's basically just another die. But it's really helpful for the GM to have this list of things that players want to see happen. So that's a big clue when they're going through a scene, introducing complications, new places. You can kind of return to that well of what do we see here? Oh, well, so and so said they wanted to see their family. Let's bring them into this next scene, but maybe in a difficult way, right? You find their bodies or something. This gives the player an opportunity to fulfill that, but also look at that and say, well, how is this helpful? You could have them alive, but I think you should be mean.
I typically leave it up to the die roll because the moment is basically the test to see if the player
Mm,
character gets the hope die or not. And the hope die is a tool for the player character to succeed for the rest of the game because it's a special die that only they get to roll that succeeds on a 5 and a 6.
mhm.
But they definitely have the chance of not making the moment roll in the first place and fall into despair. And in addition to the moments, just using the session modules, the GM also has to work with like locations
Mm.
and things that might happen in those locations. It's pretty sparse and really up to the GM's improv skills.
Hmm.
Mm. I could see this does seem to be very player driven in a lot of ways. Like, I know, Holly, you've run this for us before, spoiler alert. And it seemed like you really let us kind of pick and choose places we wanted to go to. Like, the players should be setting out in a direction rather than just reacting.
Right. Yeah. So there is a lot of player choice. You basically give your players the framework of here's the premise. Here are some locations that might be interesting to your characters, but then they're driving the truck. So they get to decide where they go, and the GM in that case is kind of along for the ride. And then so again, probably best for experienced GMs, experienced players, because so much of this is just reacting on the fly, making narrative
Mhm.
choices on the fly. It can really be a challenge. Fun challenge, but challenge.
So with all this, I know we've been playing a little bit of Wanderhome in terms of a non-horror setup. Do you think that this could potentially be run more GM-less in terms of having everyone equally contribute to the narrative, the setting at hand.
I think that's a really interesting way that you could alter the rule set. I don't think you necessarily have to have that push pull who has narrative control. I don't think that's very important. So yeah, I think it could be done for sure.
And once again, you could kind of run it. I'm still just thinking of Alien nonstop now, but it's everyone could roll their main dice and then roll the stress dice, and then like that's would really dictate the push pull, and everyone can sort of contribute to it. Or if someone really feels like they have a solid grasp of a threat, like let them run with it.
Yeah.
And if someone has a suggestion to build, instead of like, ooh, or how about instead, it has to be worse somehow, some way.
The players definitely have a lot of power if they do get narrative control because they can make up anything they want. Like I search the car and I find a revolver with 5 bullets in it. Or they can say I opened up the trunk and there's a machine gun. Like it's really you got to really trust your players to stick with the tone of the game.
100% agreed.
Yeah, how do you set that tone initially? Is that just through the truths? But how do you get them in the mindset that they won't say, "I find a machine gun," or if they do, it's justifiable?
Right.
Read a page from the road.
No, no
I
thanks. I'm good.
honestly, the
Blood Meridian.
the first time I played this with people, we just had a conversation about it, and I was like, "Yeah, you have narrative control. Let's be reasonable." And also, it's more interesting when you are facing trials and tribulations, and you're not armed to the teeth. Just
Mhm.
it's more interesting
That's too
narratively.
mature, Holly. I can't do that.
Okay, well, like at the end of the day, everyone is going to die, so it's not about
Mhm.
the
Gunning
ending.
down
It's
everything,
not
right?
about the ending. It's about the
Yep.
story.
It's about the
So,
journey.
yeah.
So, Alex, how would you pulp this up?
I'm not
So-
gonna pulp this up. I like it dark.
You could run it pulp, but again, at the end, you're all gonna
Everyone
die in an
dies, yeah.
action hero way, right? There's a lot of flexibility in the system for that because it's really all about the escalation of the die, which it's a really cool mechanic because your first scenes when you have those 10 die, you're more likely to keep succeeding.
Mhm.
So you have this kind of escalating timeline of I did a thing. Oh, I failed. Candle goes out. And I don't know those last few candles. I remember when we played, they flew by, and it's a beautiful bit of pacing to keep it where things get worse, they get worse, they get worse, they get like it escalates.
Has this ever interfered with your play sessions where you need to stop a scene immediately once one goes out? So if you're moving into the next one, oh, never mind, and moving into the next one.
I have
Yeah, it can
had
definitely happen.
I've had moments where basically like candles just go out like 3 in a row because it's like we've ended a scene, they're trying to do something else. You failed it, that candle goes dark. So it giving yourself the room to breathe a little bit. It doesn't have to be so rigid. The scene is ended in the way that like no one is going to make any more roles contributing to this, but we can still kind of draw it out, describe what's happening. It doesn't have to be this like guillotine cut. Like, all right, that's it. We're done. We're done
Mhm.
talking about this, See
Mhm.
out the narrative conclusion. Just don't call for any more die rolls, and like let it still make sense, make narrative sense. It's a story at the end of the day. So
Mhm.
I've seen some writing about improv, and this is where the eye rolls start
Really?
because I'm talking about
You're
improv.
kidding me.
I know.
Pulling my leg.
I could read a book. Um, but I think it's interesting because one of the terms they use is edits. And an edit is when someone says this scene is done, right? And that might be if you're talking improv shows, someone runs in front of the crowd, does a little sweep, and that's supposed to imply, hey, this scene is done. And the general advice is you edit before you think you need to. And I think that's an important thing that the dice are doing. It keeps a scene from going too long. And sometimes there's this idea like, oh, if I'd stayed a little bit longer, I could have hit this line that I really wanted to. It's all right. You'll get another chance at that kind of thing. It's more important to keep the flow going than to stall.
Hmm.
Yeah, pacing I tend to follow the like to call on another kind of indie RPG, Dread. The rules for Dread encourage making pulls, making rolls early and often, and I would recommend that because with 10 candles, it can be easy until you hit that like 5 candle mark when things just start going downhill super fast. The first, you know, the first 5 candles going out can take a really long time if you don't longer, like kind of almost outstaying its welcome a little bit if you let it drag on. And so calling for those rolls early and often to kind of push the pace of the game along a little bit.
So it definitely sounds like for anyone considering running this, plan to budget more time on the front half than the back half.
Yes.
And whenever you're thinking about what you might want to improvise, like know that things might get a little snappier as the story goes. It's not going to get drawn out.
Yes, 100%. And the other thing that I have struggled with consistently running this game on the improvisation side is them. Um,
Mhm.
it can be a challenge because there is literally no definition of what they are. It's up to the GM and the one player who sits next to them that defines a single trait of what they are, and then you have to kind of I mean, ideally, more is revealed as the story plays out, and everything kind of feeds into it, and you don't have to do a ton of work as the GM, but it's always nice to have something in mind about what this could possibly be. So,
Yeah.
you know.
And I think it was mentioned before, the GM's the only one that defines what
Mhm.
capital T they can do, right?
Yeah, like you can't use a player can't use candle truths to determine what they do
Mm.
or what they are.
Holly, can you talk a little bit about pacing from a player perspective in terms of they have these traits that they can burn, the brinks that they can bring into play? What's that kind of look like in play?
It can be difficult as a player. You know, we all come from RPGs where we want to hold on to our items and like not spend things.
Finish the game with 99 mega
Finish the
potions.
game with 99 things in your pocket. Yeah. So you don't want to do that. You have a stack of cards. I don't think we necessarily said that. So these cards are on a stack, and the only card on top of the stack is the one that you're currently embodying, the vice or the virtue or the hope. So you have to get through your whole stack in order to get to that brink at the bottom, that worst trait
Mhm.
that someone has seen you do.
Oh.
So
I didn't know that they were in a
they're in
stack,
a
so you
stack.
can't pick and choose what you
No.
want to burn. It's
So
there. Gotcha.
the
Okay.
goal is to get through the stack, and it's very hard to get 5 people to individually make enough rolls to get through their whole stack from a GM perspective. So going into that as a player, do not be afraid to burn the top card to attempt, even if it's just a single die that was a 1. Do it, because A, you're saving dice for future rolls for the other people at the table, and B, you know, you're working through your stack. It you know, that's the goal. The goal ultimately is to get to the bottom of your stack, and you know, who knows if you're going to get a chance anytime soon again. So take the moments. Don't have the hoarding mentality. Take the moments when they're there to just burn away your cards.
You can't make me.
Yeah, I mean, you're really robbing like the drama then, right? You could not the whole time, and maybe you would narrate that as you're trying to fight against whatever they are, this impactful thing, and you're saying, I'm never going to lose this virtue. I could see playing that kind of a paladin-y sort of look to it maybe, but there is something very joyful about how fast do you lose it? How bad does it get?
So burning a trait doesn't remove that from your character. It's still part of you.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
but that's a good way to maybe run things.
Well, yeah, but it's also, I think it's relying more on your active memory for when you're going to
Yeah,
bring that up. And it might be
Yeah.
easier to forget, even.
Mhm.
That,
I kind of see it as you have your 4 traits, and as you play the game, you develop your character more just authentically,
Mhm.
and you burn away these training wheels that made up your character in the first place.
Mhm.
Oh.
Good way to think about it. You'll never get
Right.
to your hope, and try to get the extra die to help yourself if you're not burning away these traits either. Like, it only helps you to do it. So
Yeah, it's part of the game.
it's part of the game. Don't. And, I've played with people who are like, oh, but it's only one die. I don't want to waste this like reroll on one die. I'm like, just do it. It's okay.
You might say that this is a game to lose pieces of yourself in.
What were you gonna say, Nathan?
I've completely forgotten.
You're welcome.
No, it's okay.
So we've talked a lot about the system itself in terms of how to play it and whatnot. Of course, there's lots of guides and things to read online, including, the rule book. But can we talk more about the general strengths and some limitations of the scenario? Starting, of course, with the strengths for it. Like, you all seem really enthusiastic about playing it. So what are the high points if you were going to try to sell me on it? You already have, but like, do it again.
Yeah, so I would say one of the strengths is the player characters are just doomed to die at the end. And I'm going to kind of combine it with the limitation because that's also a limitation. Um, if you have this expectation that all of your player characters are going to die, then either the players are going to be like, oh, what's the point? Or they can really take this opportunity to challenge themselves to have this unique role playing opportunity. Because, like, even though the player characters don't know they're going to die and the players do, the players have to play their player characters like they still have hope. Otherwise, like, why even bother?
Right. Like, they have to have that much dissonance in terms of committing to that character.
That's correct.
And fun enough, it's easy to do that though. Like, it's very freeing to just know that in the end it doesn't matter. So just make the most of what you're doing in this moment. And I've had players tell me like, "Oh, I actually found myself hoping for a moment in this game and kind of forgetting that I was going to die eventually."
And for such a short sort of intro too, people get lost in the characters and I think really develop them fast, which is interesting to see is you don't really have a lot of prompts. You get the vice and virtues from other people defining your characters. So it's a little randomized in a cool way.
I would say another strength is that the pre-written prompts included in the book
Mm.
give you a pretty good idea of how the general structure of the game is supposed to go, and because it is just a list of locations and an intro prompt. So therefore, if that's really simple, then in theory, it's really easy to write a homebrew scenario as well, because you just need a list of locations and a premise.
Is this something you'd see yourself writing things for, Alex?
Yeah, I see myself doing that, and I have.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we'll get to it in the war stories.
Oh, a little tease.
I think that's a strength though. If you're a GM or a person who is interested in writing for RPGs and you really haven't dipped your toes in it, maybe you're not even ready to fully commit to a scenario, just writing a brief, a setting, a couple of locations, and then playing it out and see how well, was that a good setting? Was it interesting, interactive, and immersive?
And they highlight no prep a couple times for the GMs, right? You're not supposed to prepare this long plot or
Yeah,
anything.
it's not in the spirit of the game to
Yeah,
Yeah.
do
I
that.
never do. Yeah.
Because really, everyone's giving a piece of themselves to tell this story.
Right. And that's something I think is one of the great strengths of this is that it is pretty much purely player driven in terms of what happens, what kind of things they see, what kind of people they are. It's very it's up to the players, and that's, I mean, we kind of talked about how you don't even necessarily need a GM, but it's so freeing. You don't have these rules in there. It's very improv.
Yeah, especially with the players being able to just give a fact about the world, and that I think it would really require, of course, any GM to be on their toes. That, like, this
Mhm.
random thing could either give you a great idea, or, if someone says, I find a revolver in the trunk with 5 shots in it, you're like, oh, okay, I got something, I got something. And then someone else says, we're locked inside a factory. And then that could immediately hard stop how to reconcile those and how to bring forward into the next scene and whatnot.
I think the ultimate strength of this game is the atmosphere is incredible. If you've never played like darkening the windows, playing at night, playing in the dark and when all the candles go out and it's just you're in a pitch black room. My God, it's just so atmospheric. And even just the candles slowly taking illumination out of the room, and you can't beat it, especially those audio, like the audio logs all kind of add to it. It's just incredible.
I could see you doing stuff if you wanted to do like an old timey version of this. You could even do like a letter home or something like that. Write out a little letter that you read and then burn at the end.
Mm, I like that. Some like the old timey, you said it in the 1700s. Everyone
Yeah.
writes a letter
Mhm.
instead.
Dearest Elizabeth.
Well, what you need to do is you need to buy a phonograph, and then you need to get some of those little wax cylinders. It'll be expensive. It'll be worth it. So, what about some potential limitations of this system? Have you ever run into sort of any hard blocks?
Yeah, so Holly really just talked about how being there in person and just soaking in this amazing atmosphere, dripping with style, it it's not possible to the extent as being there in person over for online play. It's not as impactful, in my opinion,
Everyone turns their Zoom videos off at the end.
one by one.
Yeah, I think I've heard of people trying it. I don't doubt that it
Mhm.
can be done to some extent, but you kind of do rob it of the atmosphere a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's even like some Roll20 modules or stuff that might randomize the candles, but I think part of it is right that physical aspect of burning the cards, of being around this light that's fading. And these are tea candles, right? They're not very bright to begin with.
No, they're tea candles.
Yeah.
And even like using real candles. We played it once at a convention, and that's even less fun, when you're dealing with like little LED candles. Just tearing up your stuff, lighting things on fire is fun. But I think we've said before the Venn diagram of RPG players and arsonists is a circle.
Unlucky.
So I can just say, sort of from my backseat position, something that seems to be a limitation to me, like the system itself seems great and it seems very well thought out. And whenever you can sit down and do it in person, it's rock solid. That said, it is entirely dependent on the players that you can bring in for that game. It seems to me that I would have to be very selective and who I would want to show this to. Like, someone may be super interested in it and, they love Cormac McCarthy, but they're not very used to role playing, or like they have a hard time with improvisation or something. It would probably be best for me to actually not choose them. And like, that kind of hurts. It also requires you to pick players that would maintain the mood. Like, we teased Alex for how to pulp it up later, but like, that also might impact if you have someone that loves to make it's oh, what's your candle truth? I shat my pants. Like, that's just gonna kill it.
I have had less than ideal experiences in both, with playing with novice players who just kind of struggle to keep up with the improv, and players who just cannot get into the mindset of you will die. You don't need to try to win. Like that just
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
try to win mentality also sounds like a killer for this. And also just any interruptions. Like, I mean, I have cats that I'm kind of worried about wandering into the candles, but I can't imagine if you have kids or something. That's and then Dad. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
hang,
we can
hang
get
on a
into that
second.
in war stories because I have some stories.
This might be treading into war story territory, but have you had players that really overthink and try and do too much ahead of time?
I've had players really spin their wheels. Mostly players will spin their wheels on the truths, because it's like you're
Mm,
putting someone on the spot, and it's like for some people you get that deer in the headlights, like, oh no, I don't know what to say. And my go-to is usually like, okay, tell me how your player's feeling, because that's the truth.
mm.
Throw a wrench in this situation, make this a more difficult situation. That's a truth. Tell me about the weather. That can be a truth too. But that can be hard. That can definitely, that's
Alex's
the one that
character is dead. And like, there's your truth. Threw a wrench in it.
I have a war story about that. We'll
Oh
save
God.
it.
Okay. We gotta hurry this along because I gotta hear all of this now. Let's say you've already sold me on it. I've got a group that I'm excited to run. We're gonna do it all in person. What would you do to really make this game shine?
All right, well, you're already doing something right by running it in person.
Oh my god,
'Cause
finally I did something
you
right.
need to do this game in person. At least try it.
Mm-hmm.
And some advice I would say, as someone who has ran 10 candles before, is to make it interesting. Surprise the players. Don't just, as the GM, just give them obstacle after obstacle and
Mhm.
bad things happen to them. You got to balance in the good things to give them a little hope, add in some neutral characters that they can talk to. And if you have this control over pacing, you're going to be fine. Give the players stuff to work with and
Do
to add
you
to.
Yeah, how do you balance that? Do you change it as you're going through and kind of throw them a bone early, but then hit them hard at the end with maybe like a little, or do you try and just read the room and see how they're feeling?
It's definitely like reading the room. You develop a knack for it the more you GM, but I always picture it as a roller coaster.
I think something else that might at least be helpful to me when GMing is just to keep a tally mark count of the good and bad things
Hmm.
that I've brought in. And if I start seeing that everything's hedging towards bad, that could be an indicator to drop something nice in. Just because sometimes I get a little too caught up in the moment. Something else I might be tempted to do, I know that y'all have talked about using cards, which of course my mind is immediately going to index cards for these things. I feel like if I were to run it, I would be more inclined to use paper, especially very thin paper that could up in flames a lot more to be a little more cinematic about it.
Well, that'd be fun.
And also, I'm assuming you wouldn't want to use like a styrofoam bowl in the center.
Yeah. I always like it's not particularly cute, but like I just put a cooking pot in the middle, like one of
Yeah.
those saucepans that have
Mhm.
deep sides. Like,
Ooh, it's 10 candles, but the candles are fireworks.
oh my god, stop it! No,
you put
Ah.
you
Don't do
put a
that.
firecracker underneath one of the candles, but you don't know which one.
You get jump scared.
You get roulette 10 candles.
I think in terms of really making this shine from a player perspective, there's some tricks you can do to really make it human. Uh, really think about your characters and your fellow players as people in the situation, not as, oh, he's the paramedic. No, 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 no. That's Dale. And Dale's a good guy. And maybe figure out how you can care about this other character. It also has the benefit of keeping everyone together because the last thing you want for these games is to have everybody go, all right, well, it's the end of the world. See ya and
Peace.
split up. Yeah, is have something to care about. Ground it, right? Is you're already normal human people. So kind of to Alex's early example is maybe you do find a machine gun and then someone goes, "Does anybody know how to use a machine gun?" Grounded in the reality of if I were to run across one, I'd go, maybe, and then I'd probably break my arm the first time I tried to shoot it. Kind of keep that in mind.
Oh my god, I'm sorry. I may be a bad person to play 10 Candles with because as soon as you said that, my next truth would be I know Kung Fu.
Sure, yeah, you've got the brown belt at the local dojo. That would be my follow-up truth. We're dueling truths here. And also for these, just kind of a general thing, because you're going to die, is be committed to your character, right? Like, this
Mm.
is the character you're going to play. You are behaving with them like a real person, but don't be too attached to a specific idea you have for the end of it. And this is just generally like kind of one of those improv rules, right? Is you have an idea at the start, but if things come in and you need to change, roll with it. It'll be more interesting being able to interact with the other people rather than trying to stick to a preset goal. And that's my improv hour.
an important discussion to have because everyone at the table has narrative control or the ability to have narrative control is having an explicit discussion of the lines and veils up front because there's a group trust that everyone at the table needs to get on board with the fact that there are some things that we will not put in this scenario that are, usually that falls to one person, the GM. But having that discussion and emphasizing that like all of us together are responsible for this narrative. So we all need to make sure that we're conscientious about what people are uncomfortable playing is an important question to have.
Right. That's a really good point, since the players also contribute a lot
Yeah.
via their facts
Mhm.
and things like that. Okay, well, I don't think I can wait any longer. We are going to move straight into war stories because Holly, I got to learn about all of it. Just
I'm not the only one with good stories. But I will talk about the time that we literally had combating truths between two players who ended a scene arguing with each other. We were it was the moon base was the setting for this one. So they ended the scene arguing with each other, and then one person's truth was like he'd found a gun. One person's truth was his gun has no bullets. And then when it got back to the guy that had the gun, he pointed to the other guy and said, his suit has a hole in it.
oh shit.
Yeah. So it can get interestingly combative. The truths do not have to necessarily help yourself or others. So yeah, that was very interesting.
Alex, can you tell us a little bit about the scenario you wrote?
Yeah, so I wanted to mix it up and use a World War I setting because I think the most recent Amnesia game came out, and I really took inspiration from that. And did a little bit of research against the spirit of the game, but just because I wanted to know World War I, and I constructed a scenario which had the uh the French soldiers crawling through like trenches, and while the world has ended and no one knows what's going on, and there's just sheer panic.
I really like that. Yeah. It's rife too, and it's just they're still in the middle of no man's land, starving, and their radios just stop working.
Yep.
That's
And
it.
the
They
the
have no more connection.
the tense atmosphere of a war going on and the fact that, people are still people, which means the war is still going on for whatever
Mhm.
reason, but also the world is ending was a really interesting, like, double whammy.
Nathan, what about you?
Uh, I've only gotten to play this once, and it was with Holly. We got to play at Necronomicon. I'm looking forward to playing it again coming up. Um, and it was a blast. At the end of it, we had a couple people that actually turned out to be working with them. And I think I killed Alex.
Yeah.
I think I killed Alex.
There
This is
was a
a
lot of
long
PvP in
list.
that. Paul Fricker from the Blasphemous Tomes was in that game with us and kind of set the tone early. I think he had the unfortunate I think he was like the player to my left. So like I got to write a truth about him, and it was basically he was working with them the whole time. Like
Mhm.
it was some kind of disease basically that was like spreading through humanity. He was a scientist that was responsible for all of it. And yeah, there was a scene where everyone's like, what do we do? We've heard that there's a hospital in the next town and like maybe they have the answer. So he calls the hospital and like everyone's sitting at the table, right? So they're hearing both sides of this conversation. And the hospital's like, oh, is the army coming? Please help us. We're overrun. And Paul's just like, uh-huh. Yep. So I got you guys gonna have to help me remember it.
It's
How did
like,
it? It was
yeah,
like,
you have food there?
yeah,
Great.
oh, you guys have
It's
food?
safe?
Everything is safe? Wonderful. But and of course everyone's at the table, so they're hearing both sides of this conversation. It's like, oh my God.
It was
They're
amazing.
so good.
He's so creative.
Yeah, so at the end he like led everyone to his lake house / laboratory where it had all originated from, and that's when it all devolved into PvP and everyone's killing each other, and like Nathan just embraces what it
Oh,
is.
it was like blob thingies
Yeah.
from I
The
don't know.
next evolutionary step.
Yes, yes.
Your
It was
my God,
uh,
your final like
The voice memo,
message
yeah.
was so again prophetic. It was
yeah.
so interesting. Yeah.
Which that was my takeaway is how well that worked is really impressive. And I don't know if it's partly because you like think of it ahead of time and that helps you kind of go that
Maybe a
direction,
little
or
bit,
if
yeah.
it's maybe a little, but you kind of forget about it as you're going and then you hear it back and you're like, oh yeah, hey, how about that?
Yeah, that was an incredible game. And on the flip side, with war stories, I have played games where like again, embodying the atmosphere is like 50% of this game. So if you can't deliver on the atmosphere, pick a different time to do it, because I tried to play it for people at a New Year's Eve party. So we had like 2 toddlers watching Frozen in the next room to kind of keep them occupied. So hearing "Let It Go" while you're trying to like maintain a tense atmosphere, not great. And then kids coming in and like flipping on the lights, like, "What are you doing? What's all the pretty candles, Daddy?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, this is
Is
a
it a
horrible
birthday?
idea." So yeah, yeah.
Every time you turn on the light, we have to turn on a candle, kid. You're killing us. You're killing us.
But you know what? At the end of the day, by the end of it, I was like, Jesus Christ, can we just end this game? Because it's not going
Can the
well.
sun just go out now? Thanks.
Tell you what, honey, blow out the candles. I'm fucking done, okay?
So yeah, seriously, like going back to advice for the GMs, like atmosphere is everything in this game. If you cannot deliver, just save it for another time, because you'll end up disappointing people.
I've just got another memorable haunting moment when we played at Necronomicon 2022, and it was with David Gasaway's character. He named his character Victor, and he had such a poignant voice memo because he's like, even though my parents named me Victor, I felt like everything but at least I have this. And then like our goal for this prompt was to reach the lighthouse at the end of the resort island. And what he ended up doing was he's like, "Yes, I made it. I made it to the lighthouse. I'm worth something." And then he just dives onto the rocks to his death. And it was like, "Holy shit."
Yeah,
That was
Jesus.
that was awesome.
I think that's the closest I've ever come to crying. It was like, oh my God, that's such an ending. What an
That was
incredible
beautiful.
ending it was.
We'll say someone has listened to this. Assume people listen to this and are going to run it. What advice would you have for them?
I would say just die a good death, have a good ending. And don't forget the journey. The buildup is what makes the ending so powerful.
To build on to Alex's die a good death, I don't think it's explicitly written this way in the rules, but I do like giving my players the freedom to choose and narrate their own deaths. Once the last candle is burnt out, everyone is dead, and the way it kind of is written is your characters survive until the end, and then they all basically die at the very end together. So giving them the freedom to choose how they die, what their final, what their words are, what ends up happening to them, can be super impactful, like in the case with David. And, it gives people a little bit of control over something that's a pretty heavy topic. So I just like doing that.
Yeah, that's great. And my main advice is just care about the characters. Really care just about you, about the person sitting next to you. Really embrace that, because that's going to make that end part really hit home.
And much like 10 Candles, I guess we're ending this recording on a downer.
Yep.
Wait, you can't say that right after I talk. Come on.
We hope our deranged utterings are helpful in bringing this aberration to life at your table. You can join the discussion on Discord and subscribe or follow the podcast to hear more gruesome consultations. Be sure to check out the show notes for links from the discussion, where to find us, and other links for things like handouts or other resources. So until next time, thanks for listening to RPG Reanimators.
Where your games can die.
Or live.
On the table. And we are alive. All
Still?
together.
Ew.
The world is dark.
Oh
Kill
my
them all.
goodness.
let them sort it out.
Yep.